Hello everyone, I'm back again, and this is going to be my review slash setup video of the Xbox Series X. Now, I cannot show you setup because setup is done in the Xbox app. So pretty much just you activate the Xbox app and you follow the instructions and go from there. But although I cannot show you how it's set up, I can show you my settings so that you can kind of have an idea of what you should put your settings to. Now, a lot of my settings are going to be based on the 9 series of OLEDs of LG, but that doesn't mean that they can't be used in other TVs depending on what your TV is capable of. Also, anything in the 9 series of OLEDs can also be used in the 10 series of OLEDs, the B10, the C10, and etc. Alright, so now that being said, let's get right into this. So if we go into settings, and we're going to scroll down to TV and display options. Oh, okay. So, first, go over to your 4K TV details. Whatever your TV is capable of, usually these check marks will be checked. Now, on some TVs, you have to actually manually engage high dynamic range. On the LG, sometimes you have to do that too. I'm just going to quickly show you how. Go into your settings. Go into your picture settings. Go all settings. Go game. Scroll down to... Oh, sorry, no, that's incorrect. Go to additional settings and go to HDMI Ultra HD Deep Color. Turn it on for the input in question that you're using. If this is not on, then your HDR probably won't work properly. Let's just zoom out a little bit. And further to that point, make sure instant game response is activated on that particular port. It will make a difference on OLED panels. Okay, now, we're back to this. So, let's escape out of this. Now you'll note that I have 120 frames per second set, or rather 120 hertz. However, I want you all to know that there is a caveat to 120 frames per second. I found personally that sometimes, it doesn't happen very often, but every once in a while, 120 frames per second crashes the system. I don't know if it's because of the everything being output through the HDMI or what it is, but I have run into a couple of hiccups. The first hiccup, however, was a limitation of my TV, so I'm going to discuss it. So, my TVs can only do variable refresh rate at 60 frames per second maximum. This is a limitation of my TV, and it's also a limitation of the 9 series of OLEDs. The 10 OLEDs can do variable refresh rate at 120 hertz, or that's what I've been told. I haven't actually seen it done yet. But I uncheck variable refresh rate because I find that variable refresh rate interferes with the gamma and picture settings. Like, it washes them out, and I don't like it. I also disengage it because I want to be able to have the full capability of HDMI 2.1. So I leave it off. Now, some of you might be saying, oh, that's heresy. You gotta have variable refresh rate. And you know what? It would make my gameplay smoother and less choppy. There's no doubt about that. But I'm willing to sacrifice that because I still have auto low latency mode, and my TV's input lag is pretty minuscule. All right, now moving across here. This is a new feature for the Xbox Series X called Auto HDR. So, Auto HDR is exactly what it sounds like. It's going to put HDR even in games that never had HDR before. The results of this are mixed. So, I like it on. I personally leave it on because I feel like I can take full advantage of it. But not every TV is going to experience this, and some TVs struggle with HDR more than others. And, you know, Auto HDR basically means that, say, a game like Halo, the original Halo or Halo Reach will automatically have HDR put into it. Uh, and again, results will vary. Sometimes the picture will look really like nice and poppy. Other times it'll look just kind of washed out because of the color range or what have you. I'll let you be the judge. I personally leave it on, but I'm not going to tell you what to do. Next is this little setting over here, allow YCC422. I don't use this. The Xbox One Series X, I almost said Xbox One. Ha! The Xbox Series X is capable of full chroma 444. So when you say allow YCC422, it's better for, say, video, or maybe if your TV cannot handle the full YCC444 chroma. And, for some TVs, this might help you a little bit, but I wouldn't check it unless you feel it's absolutely necessary, because it's not really going to do you any benefit, or give you any benefit, rather, if your TV already supports the full 444. Now, I know that some of you have mentioned in the past my lamps. It's because I film at night, and also because I really need the light in here. I'll just point my camera quickly to the ceiling. This is a bit off topic, but whatever. I have no lights on the ceiling. No pot lights, no ceiling lights, so I gotta deal with, unfortunately, the lights beside my couch. Without that, I'd be filming in the dark, and you wouldn't be able to tell really what's going on. We could certainly try that one time, see if it works, but I'd rather not. Okay, getting back to it. That was off topic. Oops, wrong button. So let's go over to video fidelity and overscan. So for this, there's been a couple of things that are confusing people. The first is color space. So some people say, well, why don't you do full PC RGB? Well, because your TV outputs at limited range most of the time. Now, it's true, the argument is that you can set your TV to output full range and then just simply make sure the TV matches the output of the console. But I'd argue that you're going to be losing details because you're outputting at a higher range, 0 to 255 instead of 16 to 255. And it's hard to explain, but I find that black can crush sometimes, or details can be lost, and that's even with you setting the black levels properly. I'm not even going to get into that, but if I remember correctly, black level low is limited, black level high is full range. So you can play with that if you want. Just keep in mind one other thing. If you do decide to use the full range RGB, then whenever you watch a movie on your Xbox, you're going to have to switch it back anyway, because movies are mastered in limited range RGB. So you're not really going to get any benefit, and it's going to get annoying because you're going to have to switch back and forth. But if all you do is play games, and if you use a computer monitor, or if you just prefer the full range look, then go for it. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I can advise against it, but in the end, it's up to you. Now, let's go on to color depth. So color depth, I leave it 8-bit. Now, there's been a lot of argument and confusion about color depth on this system. Let's clear some of it up right now. So the first thing is that anything in HDR will automatically convert the panel into 10-bit color. So your Xbox will automatically convert to 10-bit color if any HDR is detected. So leaving it at 8-bit is not a bad thing. It's not damaging anything. It's not making your picture less clear. Nothing like that. 8-bit, there's nothing wrong with 8-bit. Even though it's the lowest setting, it's fine. You really don't need 10-bit. Now, you can set it at 10-bit and see if it makes a difference for you. I think it'll vary with the TV, but I personally just leave it at 8-bit and have it auto-convert. And some of you are probably saying, well, why don't you just go to 12-bit? I know you're saying that because I was wondering the same thing. So, to answer that question, Your Xbox Series X can only output 40 gigabits per second. That is its limitation in the chipset that it has. So, what that means is at maximum, it can only output 10-bit, 120 frames per second with HDR. That is the maximum possible for the Xbox Series X. It has nothing to do with your TV. Your TV could be just like mine. It could have 48 gigabits per second bandwidth, but your console does not have 48 gigabits per second bandwidth. So what does that mean? Why then can you set 12-bit? Well, because you can set the 12-bit color, but it'll downsample to 422 chroma. So you're losing details in setting the highest setting. It might pop a little bit more, or it might look like it pops a little bit more at first, but I can assure you, you're not gaining any benefit to setting it because your console can't even really properly output it. If your console was a 48 gigabits per second console, then you could get the 12-bit 444 and you could get 120 frames per second and HDR. So on the topic of frames per second for just a second, haha, no pun intended, a lot of TVs do not support 120 frames per second. They might have a 120 hertz panel, but it doesn't support 120 frames per second. In which case, then you'll be locked to 60 anyway. And further to that point, not a lot of panels other than Samsung and LG that I know of support VRR. So you might not get the benefit of that either. Now, if I really want VRR, then I can turn it on for 60 frames per second. To me, that's good enough if you can do that. If you have the ability to do that, you're not really losing anything per se. I do prefer 120 frames per second HDR, which, by the way, in one of my previous videos, I made a mistake. I said I wasn't sure 120 frames per second HDR was possible. Oh, it is, but with limitations with variable refresh rate. So on the C10 and B10 and G10, and I think that's it for those models, those TVs can do 120 frames per second VRR, I think. Don't quote me on that. And so, but these TVs in the 9 series can only do 60 frames per second VRR. Now, again, if you turn on VRR, you might get smoothness, but you're going to get a huge gamma shift, and it's not going to be pleasant. I highly recommend, personally at least, if you care about image quality, leaving VRR off. If you care about smoothness, however, turn it on. Okay, so getting back to it, that's why I leave it at 24-bit, 8-bit, 20 bits, 24 bits per pixel. That's why I don't change that. Okay, now on to sound. Actually, wait, one more thing. So another thing that you should do, if you have an LG B9, C9, or any of the 9 series or any of the 10 series, is you should go into your expert settings under game when you have HDR enabled, and then go to this, calibrate HDR for games. What you should do, though, is when you go down to expert settings, go into dynamic tone mapping and turn on HGIG. HGIG stands for HDR Gaming Interest Group, and it works really well. It especially works for games where it actually allows you to adjust the brightness accordingly to the certain nits that you can have. If you have that option, set that option to 800 nits, and oh boy, amazing picture. Absolutely fantastic picture. And yeah, that's what I recommend you do. But that being said, when you implement HGIG or dynamic tone mapping, if you choose that route, or if you don't implement it at all, if you don't implement dynamic tone mapping at all, you should always calibrate or recalibrate HDR in your settings. Always do this to make sure you have the most optimal picture. So you do that by clicking on that option there under TV display and options. I highly recommend using HGIG, but sometimes it can look a little dim if the game doesn't support it. Again, it doesn't bother me, but it might bother some of you. If you find it to be too dim, then select dynamic tone mapping. But I warn you, although it might look more pleasing to the eye at first, the highlights are completely overblown, and out of proportion. They're so bright to the point that you really don't need it that way, and it's actually an inaccurate image that you're looking at. If you don't care about that and you're not a stickler for that kind of thing, then by all means use dynamic tone mapping. Some people kind of switch back and forth between the two. I tend to just try and leave it on one setting and keep it simple. All right. So I think I've covered everything there for video modes and whatnot. So now let's move on to sound. I had a couple of people questioning about this. So the first thing you should do before I forget to say this is make sure that your Xbox Series X, if you have a TV that can output 120 frames per second, is plugged into the port that can do that. Make sure it's plugged directly into the TV, not going through the sound bar. Now, if you do not have a TV that supports 120 frames per second and the maximum is 60 frames per second, you can totally get away with passing the video signal of the Xbox through the sound bar. However, I believe you will lose VRR because that's built into the TV, so you won't get that option. You'll be locked to 60 frames per second HDR. If you're okay with that, or if you have no other choice because your TV doesn't support Atmos and you need to plug directly into the sound bar to get Atmos, then you're stuck. But if you have the option, pass Atmos through the TV and make sure that it goes into the sound bar. Now, that being said, something you should be aware of, any soundbar which uses ARC, not EARC, most of the time downsamples Dolby Atmos into a format from Dolby Digital Plus. Now, that doesn't really bother me. With my new setup, and I'm going to have to do an updated review of an updated video of the Nakamichi. With my new setup, it's incredibly immersive. So I really don't notice the difference between that and, say, eARC. But hey, maybe eARC will prove me wrong. Maybe the Q90R will prove me wrong. Maybe the Sonos Arc will prove me wrong. If you have the Sonos Arc or the Q90R, then hey, you get the full capability. And just so you know, in an update later down the road, the Xbox Series X games will support both Dolby Vision HDR as well as Dolby Atmos. So you're going to be able to get the full capability of your TV if it comes down to audio and video, which is pretty cool. But that being said, let's continue. Make sure your HDMI audio is set to bitstream out, and then select the highest format that you can. In my case, Dolby Atmos. Maybe your case might be Dolby Digital. Whatever the case may be, select the format, and away you go. And as you can see, my Nakamichi is currently passing it out through ARC. But again, if you don't have that option, you can always jack directly into the soundbar itself, and the Xbox will detect that. But remember, you might lose some features if you plug through the soundbar instead of the TV directly. All right, so let's go over a couple of other things. There's been some confusion about external hard drives, and I don't know why. On the Xbox, it's very simple. Plug the original external drive if you have one, which was in your Xbox One X, and plug that into the Series X. Automatically, during setup, during whatever, it detects it, and it automatically transfers all your games in. Boom. Done. No fuss, no muss. Really, that's all there is to it. However, if you're booting games off of the external drive, it is going to take a little bit longer. You won't get the full capabilities of the SSD. So here's what I recommend you do. What you should do is pick a game from your back catalog, perhaps like, I don't know, say Jedi Fallen Order, and install it directly to the SSD hard drive. And then when you're done, delete it from the SSD. You'll still have your achievements and stuff, so it won't matter where it is. and then just keep a copy of it on your external hard drive. I recommend you do this because we're sort of lacking for space in these new consoles, which is my next point of contention or topic. With the Series X, you get 1 terabyte of hard drive space, but in actuality, because of the system U interface, you only get about 800 and something gigabytes. So you have to use your space very sparingly. I recommend only install Xbox Series X games and, the occasional game that you want a quick resume to onto the internal SSD, and leave the rest on an external drive. Not Xbox Series X games, however, because they require the SSD to function properly. So again, with the Series X games, install them to the internal drive, delete them when you're done, and call it a day. Don't get talked into Microsoft's proprietary external SSD memory card that they have. It's atrociously priced, and it's highway robbery, to be honest with you. And it's only a terabyte. So you'll blow through that like it's nothing at all, especially if the games are as big as I think they're going to be. So just manage your storage well, and you shouldn't ever have to worry about that kind of nonsense. Knock on wood. At least from where I'm sitting. With the Series X anyway. With the Series S, however, it's a different story. Because, as I said, 200 gigabytes is used up by the interface, right? So if the Series S has 512 gigabytes, you've actually got only about 300 and something gigs, which is virtually nothing at all. In fact, I think it's kind of garbage, but whatever. The Series S is everything the X is, but at a lower quality. Okay, and I'm sure you've heard other reviewers say that. Okay, great. But the space is atrocious. In fact, if you invested in the Series S and you bought the SSD external drive to go with it, you're actually spending the same amount as what you would on a Series X. So I don't really get the value proposition behind the Series S. I know everyone's calling it the value console, but when I did the math in my head, I just couldn't see the value in buying it. I mean, I guess maybe if you don't have 4K, or I don't know, maybe you prefer digital, you don't like disc. I don't know. I'm not one to judge. I don't, personally for myself, I don't see the value, and therefore I'm going to tell you that I don't see the value. So on the topic of games for the Series X, there aren't any real titles that I can really show you that will show off the power of this console. I'm sure if I had Call of Duty Cold War, maybe I could show you 120 frames per second on that, but I don't really like Call of Duty and I don't care for it, so I don't have it. I could also buy Yakuza Like a Dragon, but Yakuza Like a Dragon is just a port from the Xbox One. Really, it's just it's an enhanced port, an upgrade, if you will. So, to me, I don't really see anything, at least exclusive at the present moment, worth having. But playing your old games on the system rocks. Playing Mass Effect in like 120 frames per second is awesome. Playing the old games in 120 frames per second is awesome. Having HDR added into the old games is a mixed bag, but most of the time it's pretty sweet. Having 3 generations of backwards compatibility is wicked. Just that alone almost makes this console worth it. Now that being said, if you do buy a Series X, I highly recommend you subscribe to Game Pass Ultimate. No, Microsoft's not paying me to say this. I'm telling you, from a value proposition, it makes sense. Because you get your Xbox Gold, which is 2 free games per month, just like PlayStation Plus. You get your hundreds upon hundreds of free games that you can download and delete at your leisure whenever you want in Game Pass. You get Game Pass on mobile if you want, and you can play things on the go. And you also get EA Play on top of all of that now. So, yeah, the value, at least in terms of games, is definitely there on the Series X. Alright, so another thing that probably you'll notice is, that you've probably seen a couple of times, but I'll show you it anyway, is quick resume. So remember, in order to really quick resume, You need to have things installed to the SSD. I cannot stress that enough. Also, booting games off the external drive takes longer. So again, install games and delete them as necessary. I'll repeat that until I'm blue in the face. And no, that cough was not COVID, it's just allergies. Now, moving on. We're just going to fire up Mass Effect for a second. Now, if you watch my soundbar, it'll automatically convert the sound to Dolby Atmos, even though this game never had it. HDR10 automatically activated, so now it's at 10-bit. Once again, 8-bit converted to 10-bit. Alright, now we're going to get out of this. Let's start off Jedi Fallen Order. And you'll see the quick resume icon in the corner there. And it's just wicked fast, guys. Like, the power of this console is unbelievable. And now we're going back to Mass Effect. And boom. It's literally that fast. So, yeah. So I think that pretty much covers everything. And obviously I can answer any questions or concerns you might have in the comments section. And, one other thing I should mention. The menu of your Xbox Series X is unfortunately only outputting at 1080p. And what this means is that in order to adjust HDR on the Xbox, you have to fire up a game that has HDR, then go back to your settings and calibrate the HDR from there, after turning on HDIG or whatever your preference might be. Unfortunately, there's no getting around this right now. It is an unfortunate, weird limitation of the Xbox Series X, which I'm pretty sure will be patched out later on. So, yeah, there is that. But because of that, of course, right now the menu's running in SD. And, fair warning about SD on OLEDs. SD is much more likely to have image retention than HDR. I don't know why, but that is the case. So just don't leave it on this menu for too long. Try to scroll around and change screens up every once in a while, and you should be fine. I haven't experienced any burn-in on my set yet, but I have had image retention. It is there. Okay, so that wraps it up for this one, I think. I've gone over sound, I've gone over the games, I've gone over the value proposition. So I'm sure a couple of you are going to ask, well, what's better? The Xbox Series X or the PS5? And to you I say, there is no better. There is value proposition, and there is power, and there is, I guess if I can put it this way, exclusives, and, unique interface designs and innovations. And you kind of have to choose between the two. I don't really think there's a better in this case. I think they're both wonderful consoles. And I will say, though, that once the Xbox Series X is able to show off its true power, it may be close, because we've learned many things over the past week, and one such thing is that right now the PS5 is limited to 32 gigabits per second in HDMI 2.1. Will that affect anything? Only the future will tell. Well, guys, that's a wrap. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, now would be a great time to do so. Ding that bell if you want to see what I come out with next. I don't release videos as often as others, but when I do release them, I try to make them as in-depth and as detailed as possible. And so I hope you're all staying healthy. I hope you're all staying safe. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye for now.